wanted to circle back, Sam, to your mother, because it's a great example of drinking from habit. And I
Yeah.
know one of the things we wanted to maybe touch on was sort of how how are addiction and habit related? What's the, when does a habit become an addiction? So, um, I mean, I see them as overlapping rather than severity index. So habit seems less of a problem than addiction.
Mhm.
But I think that they're really intertwined. And again, it kind of gets back to sort of the physical aspects of the dependence, which increases over a longer period of time. And then the reasons that you drink, you know, what about alcohol works for you? And then there's concept I'm sure that you guys know about called motivational interviewing, which is often paired with that expert. And it's best done with someone who's a substance use counselor rather than, the physician, because of the time constraints and also the knowledge base. But essentially, it's basically drawing up, and I'm sure you guys have done this, risks and benefits, advantages and disadvantages of drinking. So to examine it, what does it do for you? I mean, it does a lot of things. And it's almost a panacea, like you're saying, David, that people will say, well, it does all these great things for me, which I don't want to give up. And then you look at sort of the downside of it. And if you really look closely, you'll find a downside as well. So that's where the motivation comes from. So that's a piece of it as well. But I don't know if I answered your question about habit and addiction or not.
Uh, well, it's just really like, where did I go from habit to addiction? I couldn't tell you. A lot of, where were you when Elvis died? It's one of those questions. Do you remember when it flipped from I I can stop this to okay, I absolutely can't stop this?
Yeah.
Um, I don't know that I ever had DTs. I don't know that I ever had full on withdrawal. Hangovers, hell yes. And if that's it, then absolutely. And I don't know where. I'd love to look and see if I could look back at my life, a magic ball, and say, where did it go from habit to addiction? And if I had
Right.
stopped then, would it never have gotten to the point where it got to where I had to go to 12 step and I had to find my way in
Yeah.
here? Addiction. Somebody said to me once, addiction is doing something is incredibly bad for you and continuing to do it anyway, and knowing the dangers. Like when they
Right.
say men are addicted to sex, they continue to do that danger and being caught by their wives, but they want to do it anyway because the desire to do it, it far outweighs
Right.
the consequence or whatever. And then of course we recognize that it's not, or addicted to
Yeah.
gambling, it's doing something and knowing you shouldn't be doing it and knowing the dangers of it and
Right.
continuing to do it anyway. Is that
Right.
right?
Right. So I kind of see that transition from habit to addiction. I kind of see it on a progressive spectrum,
Mhm.
that it's hard to pinpoint a time when it changes. I mean, you could say it changed when you drastically increase your drinking because of stressors in your life. But I kind of think of it as more of a slow progression. And I do think that the habit part of it is a big part of perpetuating
Yeah.
alcohol use. And I think even when you're quote addicted, that habit plays a large role. That's just the way that I think about it. And it might, so I'd say, I don't know when the transition came, but
Yeah.
I think, you have the genetic loading for it. And then, you had the trauma, and boy, that combination is really, really tough. And so I think for you, you're probably programmed for addiction,
Mhm.
and then the trauma happened, and then but your perpetuation of that habit. I mean, it's still drinking as a habit. Um, when you got momentum, it was harder to stop, of course. And the more of a habit, something you do every day for 20 years. I mean, it gets very ingrained. And I think we all know it, right, from our own personal lives. It's like I'm in therapy trying to change stuff that, is 50, 45 years old. And I'm just like, I'm still reflexively doing the same stupid things in my life that I learned to do when I was a teenager.
Yeah.
I mean, not the really stupid stuff like drinking and driving. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff, but I'm talking about just interpersonal things, that you're not managing things the way you should.